There is a moment most people never forget. It is not the moment of the betrayal itself, though that is painful enough. It is the moment after the quiet, disorienting silence that follows when you replay every conversation, every smile, every favor they ever did for you, and you begin to realize something deeply unsettling. The signs were always there. Every single one of them. You just did not know what you were looking at. That feeling is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is one of the most common human experiences in existence. And yet nobody teaches you how to protect yourself from it. Schools teach you mathematics and history, but nobody sits you down and explains how to read the hidden architecture of a person's character before they show you who they really are through the damage they cause. And so most people learn this lesson the hard way, through loss, through humiliation, through the specific kind of loneliness that only comes from being hurt by someone you genuinely trusted. But here is what makes this topic even more psychologically fascinating than realize. Fake friends do not behave the way movies and television would have you believe. They are not cold. They are not obviously selfish. They are not sitting in a dark corner plotting against you. In most cases, they are warm. They are funny. They make you feel seen in the early stages of the friendship. They show up when it is convenient. They laugh at your jokes, and they say exactly the kinds of things that make you feel like you have finally found someone who genuinely gets you. That is precisely what makes them so dangerous. This human brain is not wired to detect comfortable threats. It is wired to detect discomfort. And a skilled fake friend, whether they are consciously doing it or not, rarely makes you feel uncomfortable until it is far too late. This is where psychology becomes your greatest tool. Because when you understand how human behavior actually works beneath the surface, you stop relying on your feelings alone to evaluate a relationship. Feelings can be manipulated. Feelings can be manufactured. But patterns cannot lie, not over time, not when you know exactly what to look for. Let us start with something that researchers in social psychology have studied extensively. There is a concept called benevolent exploitation, and while it might sound like an academic term, what it describes is something you have almost certainly experienced in your own life. Benevolent exploitation happens when someone creates the appearance of genuine care and connection, not because they feel it, but because the appearance of it gives them access to something they want. It might be your social network, it might be your emotional labor, it might be your time, your resources, your reputation, or simply the psychological comfort of having someone available to them whenever they need it. And the extraordinary thing about this dynamic is that the person doing it is not always fully aware of what they are doing. Some fake friends are calculated and deliberate, but many of them are operating from deeply ingrained patterns of relating to people that they have never examined, patterns built on using connection as a transaction without ever admitting that to themselves. This is why simply asking yourself whether someone is a good or bad person is the wrong question entirely. Good and bad are moral categories, and most people, even those who hurt you, will not fit neatly into either one. The right question, the psychologically precise question is this: does this person's behavior toward me remain consistent when there is nothing in it for them? That single question, when answered honestly, will tell you more about the true nature of a friendship than years of shared memories ever could. Think about the people in your life right now, not the ones who show up at your celebrations, because almost anyone will show up when there is something enjoyable happening. Think about who showed up when things got hard. Think about who reached out when you had nothing to offer. Think about who stayed in the conversation even when the conversation was no longer entertaining, when it required real patience and real emotional investment. That willingness to be present without reward is not just a personality trait. It is a psychological marker of genuine attachment. And its absence is one of the clearest early warning signs that what you are dealing with is performance rather than presence. Now, here is something that will likely make you think about someone specific in your life. There is a behavioral pattern that psychologists refer to as conditional mirroring. This is when someone reflects your values, your energy, your interests, and your language back at you, not because those things are genuinely theirs, but because reflecting them makes you feel an immediate sense of connection and similarity. Human beings are neurologically wired to feel safer and more comfortable around people who seem similar to them. It is a hardwired tribal instinct that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. We trust sameness because historically sameness meant safety. Fake friends, again, whether consciously or not, exploit this instinct by becoming mirrors rather than distinct human beings in the early stages of connection. They agree with you on almost everything. They discover they love the same things you love. They share your opinions with an enthusiasm that feels incredibly validating in the moment. But here is the tell. Over time, genuine people begin to show you where they diverge from you. Real friendships contain respectful disagreement, different perspectives, the occasional moment where someone challenges you because they are their own person with their own inner life. If someone in your life never pushes back on anything, never has a perspective that contradicts yours, never expresses a preference that requires you to compromise, that is not a deep connection. That is a reflection. And reflections do not care about you. They only care about staying accurate enough to keep you looking. There is another pattern worth understanding early, And it is one that tends to reveal itself not in moments of crisis, but in something far more ordinary. Pay very close attention to how someone talks about other people when those people are not in the room. This is one of the most overlooked psychological tests of character in all of human relationship dynamics, and it works with almost perfect consistency. When someone speaks about their other friends with contempt, when they casually betray confidences, when they find it entertaining to mock people they claim to care about, when they tell you secrets that were never theirs to tell, understand something clearly. You are not the exception to this behavior. You are simply the current audience for it. The person sitting across from you and laughing while they dismantle someone else's reputation will one day be sitting across from someone else, and you will be the subject of that conversation. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most psychologically sophisticated thinkers, wrote something that has stayed relevant for nearly 2,000 years. He observed that the clearest window into a person's character is not what they say about themselves, but what they reveal when they speak about others. It is an insight that holds up perfectly under modern behavioral science, because the way someone speaks about people behind their back is a direct expression of their fundamental relationship with trust, loyalty, and respect, the exact qualities that define whether a friendship is real or constructed. What you are beginning to understand now is that spotting a fake friend is not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone around you. It is about developing a specific kind of perceptual intelligence, a trained ability to see beneath the performance to the pattern underneath, and patterns always exist. They are never hidden perfectly, because human behavior, no matter how carefully managed, always leaks truth at the edges. The question is not whether the signs are there. The question is whether you are paying close enough attention to read them before the cost of learning becomes too high. And this brings us to something that most people in this situation never stop to consider. The reason fake friendships are so hard to detect is not just about the other person's skill at deception. It is about your own psychological investment in the relationship being real. Because once you have opened up to someone, once you have shared your inner world with them, and they have been kind about it, your brain begins doing something automatic and powerful. It begins protecting that investment. It begins reinterpreting ambiguous signals as positive rather than threatening. It begins explaining away inconsistencies. It begins doing mental gymnastics to preserve the belief that what you have built with this person is genuine, because the alternative, that it was never what it seemed, is a pain that the mind instinctively tries to avoid. This psychological mechanism has a name. It is called motivated reasoning, and it is one of the most significant obstacles standing between you and your ability to clearly see a relationship for what it actually is. When you want something to be real, your brain becomes an unconscious advocate for that reality, filtering out evidence that contradicts it and amplifying evidence that confirms it. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a feature of the human brain's design, but it is a feature that fake friends, whether they know it or not, benefit from enormously. Every time you explain away a red flag, every time you convince yourself there must be a reasonable explanation for behavior that repeatedly makes you feel small, unseen, or used, you are giving someone else control over your own perception. So the real question is not just how to spot a fake friend. The real question is how to see clearly in the first place, how to override the motivated reasoning, how to distinguish between a genuinely good person going through a difficult period and someone whose fundamental orientation toward you has always been extractive rather than reciprocal. And the answer to that question begins with understanding a specific pattern of behavior that most people miss entirely, because it does not look like betrayal when it first appears. It looks like something else altogether, something that on the surface actually feels like closeness. What that pattern is and why it is so consistently present in every fake friendship, whether the relationship lasts 6 months or 16 years, is something that requires a much deeper look into the psychology of how people reveal their true intentions, not through their worst moments, but through something far more subtle and far more telling than most people ever think to examine. There's a concept in behavioral psychology that most people have never heard of, but once you understand it, you will never be able to unsee it in your relationships. It is called parasocial intimacy simulation, and while researchers typically use this term to describe the one-sided emotional bonds people form with celebrities or public figures, it applies with striking accuracy to a very specific kind of fake friendship dynamic that plays out in ordinary life every single day. This is when someone creates the feeling of deep intimacy and closeness with you, not by actually being vulnerable and open themselves, but by drawing your vulnerability out of you while carefully controlling how much of themselves they ever genuinely reveal. They ask the right questions. They lean in at the right moments. They create an atmosphere of psychological safety that makes you want to open up, and you do, and it feels like intimacy. But if you were to examine the exchange carefully afterward, you would notice something quietly disturbing. You shared everything. They shared almost nothing real. This is a pattern that the psychologist Arthur Aron studied in his famous research on interpersonal closeness, which famously produced the 36 questions designed to accelerate intimacy between strangers. What Aron's work revealed, among other things, is that the feeling of closeness is generated primarily by the act of self-disclosure, not by the duration of a relationship or even by shared experiences. When you tell someone something private, something real, something that makes you feel exposed. Your brain interprets the act of telling as the beginning of trust, regardless of whether that trust has been genuinely earned. A skilled fake friend understands this dynamic intuitively. Even if they could never articulate it in those terms, they position themselves as the listener, the confident, the one safe person you can tell anything to. And in doing so, they accumulate something extraordinarily valuable. They accumulate knowledge of your fears, your insecurities, your desires, your disappointments, and your secrets. And knowledge in the wrong hands is not intimacy, it is leverage. Now you might be wondering at this point whether there is a way to tell the difference between someone who is genuinely private and a person who is strategically withholding themselves while drawing you out. And the answer is yes, and it is more straightforward than you might expect. Genuinely private people are consistent. They do not open up easily to anyone, and they are honest about that. They might say something like, I am not great at talking about myself, or they might simply redirect conversations without making you feel like the emotional center of every interaction. But the fake friend who uses asymmetric disclosure as a tool behaves differently. They are selectively open. They will share just enough, a carefully chosen story about a past wound, a strategically placed confession about an insecurity, just enough to make you feel like the relationship is balanced and mutual. But the disclosures they offer are almost always calibrated to increase your trust and your openness without actually costing them anything real. Watch for the ratio. Watch for whether, over time, you seem to always be the one who leaves the conversation feeling emotionally spent while they leave feeling informed. There is a historical figure whose life illustrates this dynamic with almost uncomfortable precision. Cardinal Richelieu, the 17th century French statesman who served as chief minister to King Louis XV, built one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks in European history almost entirely through the manipulation of intimacy. He was famous for surrounding powerful people with individuals whose primary function was to listen, to befriend, to make the powerful feel understood and seen, and to report everything back. The people being befriended rarely suspected anything because the experience of being listened and valued felt so genuinely pleasant. Richelieu understood something that modern behavioral science has since confirmed in laboratory settings. The most effective way to gain access to a person's inner world is not to interrogate them. It is to make them feel safe enough to do it voluntarily. The weapon is comfort, the mechanism is trust, and the result when the friendship is false is that you have handed someone a map of your most vulnerable places without ever realizing you were doing it. But here's where the psychology becomes even more layered and more personally relevant to your everyday life. Because most fake friends are not operating with the calculated precision of a 17th century political manipulator. Most of them are doing something more unconscious, more human, and in some ways more insidious because it is harder to name and harder to confront. They are operating from what psychologists call an anxious attachment style combined with a fundamentally transactional model of relationships, a combination that produces someone who genuinely craves connection, but has never learned how to build it without extracting something in return. These are people who grew up in environments where love and attention were conditional, where affection was a reward for performing correctly rather than something given freely. And so they learned at a very young age that relationships are exchanges. You give me something, I give you something. And the moment the exchange stops being favorable, the relationship loses its value. Understanding this does not mean excusing the behavior. It means seeing it clearly for what it is, because when you understand the psychology driving a fake friend, you stop taking the eventual betrayal personally in a way that destroys your ability to trust anyone ever again. You start to see that what happened to you is less about your worth and more about their limitations. And that distinction matters enormously for your own psychological recovery and your ability to build genuinely healthy relationships going forward. Now let us talk about one of the most reliable behavioral tells that a friendship is not what it appears to be, because this one tends to appear early, and most people dismiss it the first few times they notice it. It is the subtle but consistent pattern of one upmanship disguised as enthusiasm. You share something good that happened to you, a promotion, a personal achievement, a moment of genuine happiness. And instead of sitting in that moment with you, your supposed friend almost immediately introduces something from their own life that matches or exceeds what you just shared. It is done with a smile. It is done in a tone that sounds celebratory. But something in the air shifts and you feel it even if you cannot immediately name what just happened. What happened is that your joy was redirected. Your moment was made smaller. And it was done so naturally and so cheerfully that confronting it feels almost impossible without sounding petty or oversensitive. Psychologists have a term for this dynamic. They call it social comparison orientation. And research consistently shows that people with high levels of this trait struggle to celebrate others genuinely because someone else's success triggers their own sense of inadequacy. But here is the critical distinction you need to understand. Everyone engages in social comparison to some degree. That is simply human. The difference lies in what a person does with that feeling. A genuine friend might feel a flicker of envy and then consciously choose to celebrate you anyway because their care for you outweighs their discomfort with their own insecurity. A fake friend, driven by a fundamentally competitive relationship with the world, cannot sustain your joy without making it about themselves. Over time, this pattern creates a specific kind of emotional exhaustion in you. You start editing what you share. You instinctively downplay your own wins before you even open your mouth. You begin to feel vaguely guilty for having good things in your life, and you may not even consciously connect that guilt to the specific person. But the source is there, and it is consistent. There is also something that neuroscience has revealed about the way our bodies register social threats before our conscious minds catch up, and this is something worth paying very close attention to in your own experience. The human nervous system evolved to detect social danger, and it does so through a process that neuroscientist Stephen Porges mapped in his polyvagal theory. Essentially, your body is constantly running threat assessments on the people around you, and it communicates its findings through subtle physiological signals that most people have learned to override or ignore. A mild tension in your chest after certain conversations, a vague sense of fatigue that follows spending time with a specific person, a subtle restlessness, a feeling that something is slightly off that you cannot quite put your finger on. These are not random emotional noise. These are your nervous system's reports from the front lines of your social world, and they deserve far more respect than most people give them. Research in the field of somatic psychology has consistently demonstrated that the body processes social and relational information through channels that run parallel to conscious thought, which means your gut is often registering the truth about a relationship several months before your mind is willing to acknowledge it. The problem is that human beings are extraordinarily good at rationalizing away physical discomfort when the alternative is confronting an uncomfortable social reality. You tell yourself you are just tired. You tell yourself you are being unfair. You tell yourself that nobody is perfect and you should not read too much into things. And in doing so, you silence the most honest reporter you have access to, your own body. Think about a friendship that eventually disappointed you. Think back to the very early stages. Was there ever a moment, even a brief one, where something felt slightly misaligned, where a comment landed strangely, where you found yourself explaining something away that in retrospect you should have examined more carefully? For most people, the honest answer is yes. There almost always was. The body knew. The conscious mind simply chose the more comfortable interpretation. Now, there is one more dimension of this that rarely gets discussed, and it is perhaps the most psychologically revealing of all. It is the way fake friends respond to your boundaries, not the dramatic, obvious violations. Those are easy enough to identify. It is the subtle, persistent erosion of small limits that tells you everything about whether someone actually respects you as a person or simply values their access to you. When you say no to a fake friend, something shifts. It might be barely perceptible at first, a slight coolness in their tone, a delay in their response, a comment delivered with a smile that somehow manages to make you feel guilty for having a preference. These micro responses to your boundaries are not accidents, they're data points. They are the relationship showing you its true architecture in moments when the performance briefly slips. Genuine friends accept your no without making it a referendum on your commitment to them. They might feel disappointed, and they might even say so, because that is honest and human. But they do not leverage your disappointment against you. They do not make you earn your way back into their warmth by abandoning the limit you set. And they certainly do not quietly file your refusal away as evidence of a debt you owe them, to be collected at some unspecified future moment when the balance of the relationship tips in their favor. That last pattern, the quiet filing away of perceived slights and imbalances, is one of the most dangerous characteristics of a fake friend, because it is entirely invisible to you until suddenly it is not. Until the day when something small happens, something that in a healthy relationship would simply be a minor misunderstanding, and the response you receive is wildly disproportionate to the situation. Because you are not actually dealing with the present moment. You are dealing with an accumulated ledger of grievances that you never knew was being kept in a currency you never agreed to trade in according to rules you were never told about. And this is the moment, this sudden disorienting, disproportionate response. This is often the first time people begin to see the friendship for what it actually was. But by that point, significant damage has usually already been done, which raises the most important question of all, the one that determines whether you walk away from these situations wiser and more discerning or simply more guarded and more closed. How do you develop the internal clarity and the relational intelligence to see this pattern clearly before it reaches that breaking point? How do you protect yourself without becoming someone who trusts no one? How do you stay open enough to build real connection while being perceptive enough to recognize when what you are being offered is an imitation of it? The answer involves a fundamental shift in how you understand the nature of trust itself, a shift that most people never make because it requires questioning something they were taught to believe about relationships from the very beginning. And what that shift reveals about how real friendship actually works, about what it looks like what it feels like and how to build it with the kind of people who will never require you to betray yourself to keep them is something that changes the way you see every relationship in your life from this moment forward. The shift begins with understanding that trust is not a feeling you have about someone, nor is it a decision you make once and then forget. Trust is a pattern you observe over time, a behavioral ledger that either balances or does not, and the most dangerous misconception you can hold is that trust is something you give to someone as a gift of faith. Real trust is not granted, it is demonstrated. It is the accumulation of countless micro moments where a person could have chosen convenience advantage or self-protection and instead chose presence, honesty, and your well-being. When you redefine trust this way, when you stop treating it as an emotional state and start treating it as an empirical observation of behavior, everything changes. You stop feeling guilty for being cautious. You stop apologizing for needing consistency. You stop confusing the intensity of your hope with the reality of their pattern. There is research by the psychologist John Gottman that offers a crucial lens for understanding this. Though he developed it while studying romantic relationships, it applies with perfect precision to friendship. Gottman discovered that the single most reliable predictor of whether a relationship will survive is not how the partners handle conflict, nor how compatible they are, but something he called the emotional bid-response ratio. An emotional bid is any attempt one person makes to connect with another, a comment about their day, a shared observation, a request for attention, a vulnerability shared. The response to these bids determines everything. In healthy relationships, partners turn toward these bids approximately 86% of the time. They acknowledge them. In relationships that fail, that ratio drops below 33%. The bids are ignored, dismissed, or met with hostility. And here is what matters for your life right now. Fake friends are masters of the performative bid response. They turn toward you when others are watching, when there is social capital to be gained, when the moment feels significant. But in the quiet, unobserved moments, when no one would know whether they responded or not, they consistently fail to turn. They change the subject. They look at their phone. They offer a hollow acknowledgement that lets you know they heard you but did not feel you. Count the bids, count the responses. The math never lies, even when the heart desperately wants it to. This brings us to the practical application of everything we have discussed, the actionable framework you can use starting today to evaluate the relationships in your life without becoming cynical or closed off. It is called the inventory of reciprocity, and it requires only honesty and memory. Take a specific relationship in your mind, not the one that is obviously toxic, but the one that sits in the ambiguous middle, the one that sometimes feels warm and sometimes feels hollow. Now, mentally remove all the entertainment value from the relationship. Remove the laughs, the good times, the shared adventures, the surface level enjoyment. Strip it down to the structural elements. When you were sick, who initiated contact? When you were struggling, who carried the emotional labor of the conversation? When you succeeded, who was capable of being happy for you without needing to claim some of the light? When you failed, who treated your failure as a problem to be solved with you rather than a burden to be managed at a distance? If what remains after you remove the fun is very little, you are not looking at a friendship. You are looking at an entertainment arrangement, and there is nothing wrong with entertainment arrangements as long as you know what they are. The betrayal only happens when you mistake the stage for the sanctuary. Now you must consider something uncomfortable but necessary, the mirror test, because while we have spent this time discussing how to identify the fake friends around you, the deeper work is ensuring you are not functioning as one to others. The patterns we have described are not exclusive to bad people. They are available to anyone who's not done the internal work of becoming genuine. So ask yourself with ruthless honesty whether you engage in conditional mirroring, whether you collect vulnerabilities as currency, whether you respond to emotional bids consistently or only when it is convenient, whether your friendships could survive the removal of your utility and your charm. The ability to spot a fake friend is useless if you are unconsciously faking your way through your own relationships, using people as mirrors to prop up your self-image rather than as distinct individuals to be known and valued. The work of discernment begins with the work of integrity. But here is the revelation that changes everything, the psychological truth that sits at the center of this entire discussion like a stone dropped in still water. The reason fake friends hurt so much is not actually because they betrayed your trust. It is because they confirmed a fear you already had about yourself, that you were not worth genuine love, that you had to perform to be accepted, that if people saw the real you, they would leave. Fake friends do not create that wound. They find it, they settle into it like a comfortable chair. And the reason you could not see them clearly was not because they were so skilled at deception, but because you were so hungry for confirmation that you were lovable that you ignored the evidence that this particular confirmation was counterfeit. This is not blame. This is anatomy. When you heal that wound, when you stop needing external validation to believe in your own worth, the fake friends do not become easier to spot. They become irrelevant. they cannot land in your life because there is no soft place for them to settle anymore. The strongest practical lesson you can take from this is the concept of selective intimacy. Most people operate on a binary model of relationships where someone is either a stranger or a trusted confidant, and the transition between the two happens suddenly and without sufficient testing. But emotional intelligence requires a gradient approach. You offer small vulnerabilities first. You observe how they are held. You offer medium-sized trust next. You watch what happens to it. You do not jump to the deepest layers of yourself simply because someone has been present for a long time or because they ask the right questions. Time is not a measure of trust. Depth is, and depth must be excavated carefully with attention to how the other person responds to each layer before you show them the next. There is a specific stress test you can apply that reveals everything you need to know about a friendship's foundation. It is not a game. It is simply a pause. Stop initiating contact. Stop performing the emotional labor. Stop driving the conversation forward. Become passively receptive rather than actively accommodating, and observe what happens. In a genuine friendship, the other person notices the shift. They reach out. They wonder if something is wrong. The dynamic rebalances naturally because their interest in you is not contingent on your constant output. In a fake friendship, the silence grows. Days become weeks. The relationship atrophies not because they are angry or because something happened, but because without your energy input, there was never any relationship there at all. It was a reflection that required your light to exist, and when you stopped shining, the reflection disappeared. This test is not cruel, it is clarifying, and the clarity it provides is a gift even when it hurts. You must also understand that letting go of fake friends is not an act of cruelty or superiority, it is an act of honesty. When you release someone from the obligation to be something they never were, you are freeing them just as much as you are freeing yourself. You are acknowledging that the contract between you is based on illusions, and illusions are exhausting to maintain. The liberation that follows is not just the absence of betrayal. It is the presence of something else, something that feels like oxygen after you have been holding your breath for years. You suddenly have energy for the people who actually see you. You suddenly have space for relationships that do not require you to manage perceptions or monitor your words. You discover that real friendship feels like rest, not work. The final truth is this: real friendship is not defined by longevity, nor by intensity, nor by shared history. It is defined by mutual transformation. When you are with a real friend, you become more yourself, not less. You do not have to shrink to make them comfortable. You do not have to expand to keep them interested. You simply exist, and in that existence, you are witnessed without being consumed, supported without being used, challenged without being diminished. These people are rare. They are not found by accident. They are recognized through the very discernment we have been discussing, and they are kept through the reciprocal offering of the same authenticity you are seeking. If this has resonated with you, if you are sitting with the specific names of specific people in your mind right now, feeling that uncomfortable recognition, then you already know what you need to do. You do not need to confront anyone. You do not need to perform any dramatic endings. You simply need to see clearly, and from that clarity to choose differently, to invest your time where it is actually returned, to love the people who love you in a language you can feel, to stop pouring your precious water into vessels that cannot hold it. If you found value in this, consider it a signal that you are ready to do this work seriously. Like this video, not for me, but as a commitment to yourself that you will stop accepting imitations when the real thing is possible. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey of unpacking human behavior with clarity and without judgment. Leave a comment below about a moment when you finally saw a friendship for what it truly was, not to vent, but to help someone else reading recognize their own pattern. And when you are ready to go deeper into understanding the psychology of the people around you, watch the video on your screen now about how to read anyone's true intentions in the first 5 minutes of meeting them. Your discernment is a skill. Sharpen it. Your peace depends on it.